an associate editor of The Spectator, and also James Rubin, a US State Department spokesman under the Clinton administration. You're both very welcome. Thanks for joining me. Douglas, first of all, there's absolutely nothing tentative in what the president is saying. He's very much asserting his right to make comments on the EU referendum, and he does have that right, doesn't he?
Yes, of course he does. I mean, he's head of state of one of our most important allies. I have to say that I do have a slight grin this morning. I mean, about a year ago, I was in Washington, and I remember the Obama administration was taking huge exception to the decision by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, to go to Washington and tell Washington what they ought to do. The Obama administration hated being told what to do by a foreign leader on that occasion. I think Mr. Netanyahu had the right on that occasion. I think Mr. Obama has the right on this occasion. It's just that he's arguing something which I think is fundamentally wrong. Very quickly, the point here is Mr. Obama is arguing for Britain to remain in the EU, not for Britain's best interests, but for Americans' best interests. America has always seen our presence in the EU as being a mollifying presence to help direct the EU in a vaguely more pro-American direction, in a more sympathetic direction for America. So I can understand Mr. Obama saying this for America's self-interest. That doesn't mean that it's in our self-interest to remain in the EU.
And James, you were making the point in our conversation just a few moments ago that some of the critics of Mr. Obama are essentially confusing domestic and foreign policy concerns.
Very much so. It is interesting to hear some of the complaints from the likes of Boris Johnson, who seems to be living in the past. The idea that the United States and the United Kingdom have similar and equal status in the world is absurd. And if Boris Johnson didn't like the argument the United States was taking, it's because he doesn't seem to understand that we're not a potential member of the EU. We're not part of the EU. To compare our positions on sovereignty is really missing the boat. But the larger point here is that we in the United States and British foreign policy have a lot in common. We have common interests. It's not a question of American interests and British interests. We have common interests. We have common interests in seeing the world become as peaceful and as prosperous and as democratic as it can be. Those values are values that our countries fought for in World War II, are values that we fought for during the Cold War. It is our view that being part of the European Union, we have a better ability to pursue our common interests by, for example, imposing sanctions on Russia. Without the British role in the European Union, I don't think it would have been as strong. So these are important foreign policy goals that we share. It's not a question of British and American, it's common.
But when those Brexit campaigners say, well, the US would never cede control over A, B, or C, or allow itself to be told what to do, you're saying to them, well, look, America is bigger than the UK. It is economically more powerful than the UK. That is a simple fact.
Well, we do have an entire continent from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. The European Union is similar in size, but I don't want to get into a match about who's bigger or smaller. I think what people are missing is that America's view is based on our shared values and our common interest in how to promote our shared values.
Let me bring Douglas in.
Our shared values and our common interests are best epitomized by our joint membership of NATO, as you well know. It's best security-wise assisted by our membership of the Five Eyes intelligence network, none of the other members of which are EU member states. Anybody interested in democracy and the growth of democracy in general could not possibly be supportive of the European Union, an entity which is less and less democratic and accountable by the year. If Mr. Obama wants to encourage the spread of democracy, he should be encouraging Britain to step back from the EU, or be encouraging the EU to become genuinely what it was meant to be at the beginning, not this power-grabbing entity in Brussels, which it has sadly become.
Do you think
Let me just focus in on the
James.
democracy issue, because this is very interesting. Some of my colleagues who are looking to get the British out of the EU seem to have forgotten what a powerful role membership in the European Union played for all the countries of Southeastern Europe, the Serbs, the Croats, the Albanians, all the Balkan states. And we managed to convince them to do democratic things, to promote democracy by their ability to get into the European Union. And I can't imagine, that's a fact, that's not a question. And so those are the type of democratic values that a British role in the European Union, we believe, is better. Now, the British have every right to choose to leave it. And we're not saying they don't have that right. But if we want to promote democracy, if we want to impose sanctions, and security is about sanctions, not just NATO.
Douglas, in real terms, how much ability do you think President Obama's comments have to influence votes in this referendum?
Well, I mean, there is obviously a massive effort going on at the behest of Downing Street to encourage allies to claim that we would be in a disaster zone if we exited the EU. I think this has the potential to scare a lot of voters into voting Remain. On the other hand, there could well be a backlash against it. Many people will notice that Mr. Obama doesn't have an open border with Mexico, for instance, and would not appreciate us urging him to have one. Many people will wonder why an American president is coming and insisting that we do something in America's interests that is very likely not in our own interests. So there's a possibility there will be a backlash against this. And by the way, very quickly on the security thing, it's only a month ago that a suicide bomber went off right beside the European Commission's headquarters in Brussels. Nothing we could do in further integration in the EU could stop that happening. What we do have is a very serious set of domestic security problems and a lot of EU security problems. The idea that we need more of that EU to make us safe, as Mr. Obama is saying, is madness.
Just a final thought from you, James, if you would. Liam Fox says that President Obama has a starry-eyed view of Europe, and this is coming from someone who's a transatlanticist. Do you think that is the case, that Americans generally have some misperceptions about the European Union?
No, I think Liam is living in a dream world. The other day, I was with him on a program where he admitted that he was worried if the Scottish left Britain, then NATO would have a big hole in it. And he seems to have forgotten that all the pundits seem to say that if Britain pulls out of the EU, Scotland will pull out of Britain, and NATO will have a big hole in it. So there's a left-hand, right-hand problem. One day they say one thing, one day they say something else.
Not true that Scotland goes out if
that's what everybody's saying. You know, I'm just reading the newspapers.
No. I can assure you that's what a few pundits had said.
Not a few
pundits. Shouldn't simply recycle
the leaders of the Scottish National Party are saying this. It's not pundits.
Of course,
so either is it pundits or is it leaders of political parties?
Of course, the SNP is saying that.
We can see the passions. We can see the passions over this debate, and I'm sure when we hear that news conference with the Prime Minister and the President, there'll be much more poring over and looking at every nuance of what's been said. For the moment, though, James Rubin and Douglas Murray, thank you very much indeed for joining us here.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.